I know, Jared, I've had conversations with people where their wealth has risen to that point, going back to Ecclesiastes, where it says, and what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them? Mm-hmm. I think when I read that and I think about somebody with really high net worth, I think at some point, if you're not able to use and consume that over time and spend it on your family, your travel, or giving, at some point you're just looking at it, it actually can cause more problems than it does happiness.
Yeah. Well, that was Taatjes talking about his experience with the problem of moving goalposts. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here. On today's podcast, we're continuing to answer the all-important question, how much is enough? The Bible warns repeatedly about the luring effects of more wealth, more riches, more fame, more stuff. And while growing assets and having a sizable nest egg isn't wrong, the desire for more many times steers retirees off course. In this podcast, Taatjes will give you specific questions for you to answer so you don't fall victim to the problem of the moving goalposts. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Jared Sebesta here. So glad that you're joining us here on the podcast today. We have a lot of new listeners, new platforms all the time. If you are new to our platform, you're going to hear a much different conversation here today. We call this podcast Retiree Purpose, finding a new purpose and a new life in retirement. Lots of times we say retirement needs to be reinvented, reimagined, rethought. There is a way that you think about retirement, whether you like it or not. You've been sold a certain script from society that retirement should look like X, Y, and Z. You work for 30, 40 years, you retire at 65, and then you spend the rest of your life vacationing and doing leisure time. And we believe that there's a different way that you can rethink retirement to make it the best years of your life. So if that's what you're into, you have certainly come to the right place. We have been talking extensively about our mantra. On the financial side of our business, we have a philosophy called time, talent, and treasure. We believe at the end of the day, our best role, our biggest role, is to help retirees and pre-retirees steward their time, their talent, not just their treasure. Of course, that is a major piece of our business, but also to helping people really step into this new way of living. We've spent the last dozen plus episodes breaking down this mantra in detail of time, talent, and now on the treasure. If you've missed those episodes, man, I just can't encourage you enough to go back and listen to a lot of those shows, especially when we talked about time. Of the three, which is most important, time, talent, or treasure? I think we can all agree that it would be time. It is a finite resource, and obviously every day that goes by, it's one more day that we don't have left in our life. So again, it's such an crucial aspect of not only retirement, but also life. We talked about how you should be spending your time. What should you be doing with your time? And then we got into the talent aspect, the repurposed process of really getting down to understanding who you are, your experiences, your talents, your abilities, and how you can package those into a new way of living in retirement. And then the last couple of shows, we've been then talking about the treasure side. And we're going to continue on this pace here today, talking about the problem of the moving goalposts. We're not going to give specific strategies, certainly nothing investment related on this podcast. So if that's what you're looking for, you're not going to get it here today, but we're going to talk about how we need to frame our wealth so it doesn't become a problem where it causes more problems and stress in our life, rather than setting us free and liberating us to live a free and impactful life. We spent the last couple of shows talking about some specific questions. And one of the questions that we spent the last few shows on is, how much is enough? It's a really important question that you, as not just a retiree, but person in general, need to answer, because it gets down to this heart level of what your wealth and your money really means to you. Taatjes joins me on the show now. Last week we talked about how every retiree needs a budget, but more so really, again, how do you frame wealth in your life and in your retirement?
Yeah, Jared, that's one that oftentimes I get a funny look. I bring up hey, you guys really need a budget. And many times I'm speaking with a retiree that perhaps is very high net worth and has a significant nest egg that they've built up over the years. And the key from that comment that I want to make sure people hear again and again is that when you were saving money, when you were in accumulation stage, a lot of financial people say you need a budget. So that way you know what's left over so you can save it for later. Mm-hmm. What I'm doing is I'm saying, no, you still need a budget, but the goal is different. I want you to figure out what your basic needs are, and then there's almost always something left over. But I want you to be spending that. I want it to be boundaries around so we can feel free and liberated to actually spend the money and to give away the money that's in excess of what I need.
Yeah, I think that's such a great analogy, and I think that's liberating. The worst thing is that people, they'll work 30, 40 years. They built a life. They've saved. They've sacrificed. They've delayed gratification, so to speak. Then they get to retirement, and they can't enjoy the fruits of their labor because of fear. We're going to talk about that today. But last week, you gave a great analogy, the study of the playground. They have kids play on a playground that doesn't have a fence or a boundary around it. The kids generally just kind of stayed close to the playground. But then they put a fence, even a long distance away from that particular playground, and said, hey, you can play anywhere in this area, just don't go past the fence. And those kids stretched themselves and they utilized their entire space. Our finances work the same way. The budget can give you kind of the boundary, so to speak, and it frees up the person to be able to take their spending to the max and utilize it for what it was, and that was enjoying and giving and making an impact.
Yeah, people need boundaries, Jared. I've seen this so many times in my career where unless somebody can see, like directly, that there's a boundary of where they can go, they won't go up to that boundary. They'll usually, if they're successful and have saved a lot of money, they'll err on the side of caution. They'll err on the side of, I'm going to stay close to the playground, I'm going to stay close to the center. I won't expand my thinking. I won't actually take the trip. I won't, give that money away. Until they see that they are capable of doing that and they see the boundaries, they will not go out to the edge.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If you missed last week's show, I can't encourage you enough. Go back and listen to that show. And again, if you're new to our podcast, listen to the last several shows, because it really gives you an idea of what this is all about, into the talent section, or the treasure section of our mantra: time, talent, and treasure. As I mentioned just a moment ago, we're going to talk about the problem of the moving goalposts, and we're really still trying to answer this question: how much is enough? Ben, before we even get into that, again, I don't want to go too deep here right away, but huge problem, right? Wealth is just never enough. The Bible speaks about wealth. The Bible talks about money, how it's this thing that can distract us so much. How often do you see in this business the problem of the moving goalposts?
Well, it happens all the time. It's happened personally, Jared, to me. I can remember a time in my life where I saw, well, if I could only get to this level, if I could only amass this amount, I'd be fine. And for some reason, when you get there, you are let down. There is a next big thing. There is another another goal that you set. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with setting goals, but I think when we're putting our hope, or we're trying to amass wealth for security reasons, I think it can be a real problem. Ecclesiastes 5:11 says, "As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them?" To me, that's really, summarizes what we're talking about here. Is there's a point at which really you're amassing more wealth as more of a scorecard, right, in your own, like, how you feel about yourself. Yeah. That is really easy to happen. So what's hard to do is recognize it, to see, oh wait, I am where I was hoping I could be a year ago, but now yet I want more. Yeah. And I think it's tough. It's a delicate balance, Jared. But I think more often than not, as Americans, we lose sight of that moving goalpost.
Well, you brought up something really important, is that we put our value in that. And that is unfortunately a very common thing that happens, because, think about it. If it doesn't take a lot of time to kind of connect the dots. You have a job, whether you like that job or not, it gives you some sense of purpose, some sense of value, like you're doing something. And then you take that away, which essentially that's all retirement is. You're just taking work out of the life equation. Now, all of a sudden, this thing that you got purpose from, you no longer have. Now you're speaking with a financial professional predominantly about money, and now your life becomes all about the wealth that you've accumulated and maintaining it, holding on to it, at any price. And obviously, I'm, being slightly facetious here, but it's pretty easy why somebody would then put their worth on their worth, so to speak, and that's just really a bad place to have it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we know we're supposed to put our hope, Jared. I think that's part of the problem is it's not necessarily having more. In fact, it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I know some very wealthy people who fully understand this, and contentment's far less about how much you're making, and way more about what you're doing with what you're getting,
mm-hmm.
right? And are you being a good steward of that? And I think too many times we look at wealthy as, oh man, they must be all caught up in that. Many times I see that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Now it does happen where people have that financial scorecard and that's their reason
Yep.
for the growth. But again, we want to make sure people hear that money
mm-hmm.
is the means to get things. It's the means to travel, to give, to charity, to experience. It isn't the end.
Mm.
It can't be the goal. And when it starts looking like the end and not the means, that's probably where you start to think, okay, I do have a problem here.
Mm.
We have plenty of means to get us through our day. We have all of our daily needs met, but yet we're still searching for the end goal, which is having this pile of money. And there is no single amount of money. I can promise you that. There's no amount of money that would ever fill that for you. Mm-hmm. There's always somebody out there that has a little bit more.
Yeah.
There's always somebody out there that's a little more successful, has a little more money, has a little bit bigger house, faster car, whatever that is for you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of really defining for people what is enough for you.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, but I think it's important we talk about it.
Yeah, 100%. That's why this question is so important. It gets right down to the heart level of how you frame money in your life. Again, we're talking about moving goalposts. Before we get into kind of some tactics on people for that people can take away from the show, maybe some questions that they can answer for themselves to frame this up and maybe create some awareness. Ben, I stumbled across an article from the USA Today. This is from October 2023, but it was titled, "Here's What Wealthy," using quotes, "means in 2023 to Americans in 5 numbers." So in this article, they give out 5 specific numbers, and I want to walk through you and our listeners what these numbers are and what they actually mean. The very first number was $2.6 million. Okay, I think we probably all agree that's a fair amount of money, right? That's not small. That number, Ben, that's actually represents the net worth of the median American family in the upper 10% of income. Does that surprise you? Does that seem high or low, or about right in track with what you thought?
Yeah, I guess I haven't thought about it that way, Jared. I mean, I look at that number, and I think most listeners, they would be, wow, that's a lot of money, mm-hmm. right? And I would agree that is a lot. But again, I don't know if that's enough for a person. It depends on, again, is it enough to meet your daily needs? It depends on what those daily needs are.
Yeah.
I know there definitely is a correlation between money and happiness. Mm-hmm. The reality of it is there is some correlation to that.
Are these people happy? That's a better question.
A much better question. I would say, who knows?
Yeah.
But I think many times when you get to the upper net worth of individuals, certainly in America, you find that the happiness actually may decrease as they get more wealth.
Yeah.
And it may not even be, that 2.6 million or wherever that study showed. But I know, Jared, I've had conversations with people where their wealth has risen to that point, going back to Ecclesiastes, where it says, and what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them? Mm-hmm. I think when I read that, and I think about somebody with really high net worth, I think at some point, if you're not able to use and consume that over time and spend it on your family, your travel, or giving, at some point you're just looking at it. It actually can cause more problems than it does happiness.
Yeah, and you've seen that many, many times working with retirees over the course of 20 years, I'm sure. All right, the next number is $483,000. Okay, what is that? That is actually how much Americans believe that they would need to earn a year in order to be rich. Okay, so that's yearly income, almost $500,000. Ben, what are your initial thoughts on that number?
Well, it's super interesting, Jared, to think about how Americans look at what they would need, right, to be quote unquote rich, and it's such a totally dependent on who you're talking to and their situation.
Yeah.
But again, I know that being in America, right, just making $30,000 a year makes us some of the most wealthy people in the world and the most fortunate.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when we were kids though, Ben, I mean, making $100,000, it was like, that's the benchmark of wealth. If I can make $100,000 someday. So it's interesting, who you ask and even maybe the timing of some of these numbers. Another number, 2.2 million. That's actually how much net worth an American needs to actually be considered quote unquote wealthy in 2023. So that's the actual, benchmark. That is like the data says that. In your opinion, again, we just kind of touched on it, 2.2 million. Does that make you wealthy? Do you need more than that to be wealthy? Can you be wealthy less than that? Again, it kind of comes back to heart condition, doesn't it?
Both heart and location and where you're at, where your expenses are, right? I mean, if we look at having that amount and you live in New York or LA or one of these places where it just takes a whole lot more to meet your daily needs. I mean, rent in New York is insane. You were just in New York, right? Yeah. And you look at the actual cost of living there, and I don't know that they would agree with that number. So again, that's a national average number, but that's again why I think it's so important that you look at your own specific situation.
The next number is $560,000. That is the sum of the average net worth of Americans who actually feel wealthy. Okay, so again, they ask people, do you feel wealthy? Yes or no. If they said yes, the net worth of those people was just over $500,000. Again, that's going to sound different to a New Yorker compared to somebody who lives perhaps in middle America.
Yeah, and it's about feeling, right? And it's about how do you feel as if your daily needs are met, right? And do you feel as if you don't have to worry about money? And I think that's a key.
That's a huge one.
That's a huge part of when we look at really defining what is enough.
Yeah, if your wealth is serving you and bringing you security, great. And if it doesn't, no matter how much you have, it really doesn't matter. The final number is $1 million. And again, we all know this one is kind of this is the proverbial quintessential benchmark of American wealth. Ben, how have you seen the $1 million benchmark change in your career in 20 years?
Well, yeah, over the 20 years here, I've seen many people that get to that $1 million. And that number, I don't think people understand how big a difference, just in somebody's mind and their psyche, there is between $1 million and $999,000. Because when you hit that number, it's like set. It's like, oh, now I'm a millionaire. I have $1 million saved. Yeah. When it dips below that, then that's when you could see a lot of people really struggle with it going backwards.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we build income plans, and you may have to dip into some of that. So somebody finally gets there and then immediately starts drawing on that. You can see why people would have a really hard time spending, and how this wealth actually just becomes now this like struggle, and kind of puts you in more bondage than actually setting you free. So I thought that was really interesting, just to kind of have an open conversation about some of these numbers. How did you feel listening from home? Did some of those numbers strike you as high, low, and where would you put some of those numbers in your head, in your heart? So let's talk about what can people do. What are some questions that our listeners at home can ask themselves to prevent this moving goalpost problem, whether somebody has $500,000 in the bank or $300,000 or maybe $2.2 million? Where do people start?
We start with the word contentment, Jared. I think you look at somebody's situation, and like, as I said at the beginning of the show, financial contentment is really the result of spending less than we make, not by how much we make. So when you hear people that make more money or people that make less money, it doesn't have to do with what they're making. It has to do with how they're viewing it, and that they're spending less than they're making, right? So I think you look at contentment as the goal, and how does that not shift over time? It helps with you realizing that money is a tool. Helps you realizing that maybe taking an accounting, looking backwards to say how have we shifted the way we look at money today versus 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah. You work through questions with our clients through these processes. Again, this whole idea of how much is enough. This isn't just something that we came up with here to, talk about on a podcast. These are actual questions that you use in meetings. Get into some of these questions. How do you frame this up in a meeting to kind of get people being able to answer some of these questions that get down to a heart level?
Yeah. So one of the first questions, Jared, is in the last month, What was something enjoyable your income allowed you to do? So that question kind of helps us set the stage for thinking about your money as a tool. So many times then we bring up, we traveled. We were able to experience something. It gets people thinking about, yes, that money was useful as a tool to get an experience, but also the word income. I don't say when the last month, what was something enjoyable your wealth allowed you to do? It's your income. It's that usable side of money. And then people see, it is a tool. It is the means to me getting an experience, to me giving, to me, accomplishing something in my life.
Yeah, I think it's probably pretty typical that retirees, we have short memories, and everybody has short memories where we forget, what our income did for us and allowed us to experience. And I could see how that would help connect the dots between the income that they've helped create for themselves and the life that they're living. What's another question?
In the last month, how did your wealth impact how you spent your time? And notice I'm talking about wealth there again. Many times people are like, I spent a lot of time, looking at, my financial reports, or, I'm trying to manage this rental property, or I'm doing this, or I'm spending a lot of time. And really what we're trying to get at there is your wealth actually causing you to lose most of your most valuable resource, which is your time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So if we can be thinking about it through that lens, it does help potentially the client see, I do need to simplify things. I do need to take back some of my time, right, by removing some of the worry or the anxiety around the wealth.
Yeah, there could be some positive answers to that question, but also some negative ones. You're trying to eliminate the negative ones. And again, I don't want to go too deep into this, but we've seen this where now, again, when you eliminate work out of the life equation, what that did for you is it opened up time. Now, all of a sudden, people get back 30, 40 hours a week into their life. Unfortunately, a lot of people fill that up with, doing not real productive tasks like watching television. And unfortunately, what a lot of the commentary, the news that gets watched is financial news. And man, then you watch this downward spiral where now they're spending so much of their time focused on their wealth, things that they weren't normally doing. And you can kind of see, you've seen this probably coming in from a mile away, where people come into a meeting, you say, how are things going? And they give you an answer of not so good because of perhaps some things happening in the market. Explain that.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. I ask, how are you doing today? And they say, well, it's a lousy day in the markets. I'm like, well, no, I didn't ask how the markets are doing. It's how you're doing as a person. Are you, those things should not be related, right? If you're up and down with the stock market, you personally, that's a real issue. And I think we've got to address it.
Let's talk about question number 3.
Tell me about what money was like for your family when you were a kid.
That's a big one.
And how has it changed, right? Getting to that, thinking through and talking through that, both you and your spouse, about, how did you see money growing up? Because that is part of how you will look at it today.
So explain that a little bit more. Well, somebody that came from, I'm guessing here, somebody who came from more scarcity where money was tight, do they tend to have a little bit more tie to the proverbial number on a screen, or does it just depend?
Well, it depends. I mean, there's certainly ways you can break free from that with generosity, and you see that from time to time. But I think many times what I do see is we're raised in a certain way. I think that's part of the reason that some people are very successful and they've been able to save a lot, is they saw saving and they saw the importance of that as a kid. And that's good. I want clients to be able to delay gratification, be able to save over time. The problem is when that money becomes then a god, or it becomes more than, a tool. It becomes something that is something that they can't part ways with.
Sure.
That's when you start to see more of an issue.
And that can certainly happen for people that didn't come from scarcity or from where money was tight. So again, it all boils back to where is your heart posture in all of this. Let's talk about question 4.
Yeah, so if you were able to increase your cash flow, perhaps dramatically, how would you see that income being used or spent? And that question, Jared, I mean, so many times people are like, they come to that realization that I do have everything I need. When you really pose it that way, you're like, if you had an extra $100,000 a year, what would you do with it? And they start to think many times, it's like, oh yeah, we wouldn't change our lifestyle a whole lot. We wouldn't, maybe we'd give a little more to our kids, we'd give a little charity. I think it starts them thinking along that, hey, money is just a tool. Money is, again, the means for us to get things accomplish, right?
Yeah.
It's a tool. It should not be the goal.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.